Hello again, and welcome to Storytime with Uncle Gravy. Big hellos to Isaac and to Theo and to Joseph and anybody else that's been following the story. And if you haven't been following the story, guess what? Because it's on YouTube, you can start right at the very beginning. Because as somebody very famously said, that is the very best place to start. So we're going to carry on to chapter something. And we're going to pick up from where we left off just yesterday. While Holly and Jake were in each of their bedrooms, each trying to work out what they had seen, or thought they had seen, each set of parents were assuming they were just sleeping or getting over their nighttime scientific studying. During this quiet time after breakfast, Holly's dad took the opportunity to gather together some tools from the understairs cupboard, ready to cut a hedgehog-sized hole in the fence where the two gardens met. Holly's mum had said that she didn't want a hole to be torn out of the fence, so a small hacksaw and a long pruning saw were going to be used to ensure neat cuts. And a set square and a soft pencil were coming along too, so that neat and straight lines could be drawn as guides before any cutting happened at all. The pencil was a bonus. It was one of those smaller, flat pencils that grandparents seem to pass down in old toolboxes and can tuck easily behind an ear. Holly's dad always felt there was something good about having a pencil tucked behind his ear. It made no sense, but he knew he wasn't the only one that thought it. He walked down to the end of the garden, stepped over the pond and, after clearing away a lot of tangled plants and brambles, crouched down in the corner of the garden. The air felt different at that end of the grass, he thought. It was slightly damp and musky, and it smelt more like a place where nature was in control and could roam around without being bothered too much. He felt hopeful as he started to draw very clear and straight lines on the fence that this hole would open up their gardens to lots of new visitors and stories. He had no idea just how right he was. A matter of footsteps away, Chris was standing by the fence and looking at one particular plant which had been growing very well. Bernie watched on, trying to work out what was so interesting, but then realised that they were both looking at the seedling, which had sprouted from Ash's striped seed. The morning that it was planted there had been some funny moments, and it now felt like a long time ago. But as Bernie looked at the new life growing up and away from the ground, suddenly Ash felt closer in some way. Chris seemed to just have a sense for things a lot of the time, and even though Bernie was standing behind a nearby clump of tall grass, began speaking before Bernie could say anything. This will grow into a very tall and very important plant. The giants call them sunflowers, if you remember. They grow them up at the top of the garden every year. It's not as sunny down here at the moment, so it won't grow as fast, but it'll be good to have a reminder of Ash. I think we should leave it to grow instead of eating it. We can visit it often and have some thinking time by it when it gets bigger, or when we need to. Bernie was seeing a different side to Chris at the moment, and although it felt natural to walk forward and just stand for a few seconds and think, it felt more natural to lean against Chris and say, "That's a lovely idea, you know. If Ash comes back one day, I will share what you said just then. It might be easy to think you're a bit bossy sometimes, always planning and organising, but I know Ash would be really happy to hear about your plan this time." Chris looked at Bernie. Russells didn't really talk about emotions. They didn't usually need to, nor did they need to go into a lot of detail about feelings, so it felt strange to hear Bernie's kind words, and a little strange too to realise that the feelings at their end of the garden at the moment involved far more than finding food and water and shelter for that day. Ash's sudden disappearance was prompting a lot of new things, including new thoughts and ideas, and Chris now felt that some would take a little while to get used to. Neither of them had had much time to think anymore, though, as out of nowhere, Holly's dad began scraping the lines which he had very carefully drawn on the fence with the end of a small saw. The thin slats of wood bounced a little as he drew the saw along them, creating a lot of noise and bother. Spiders scurried, ants changed the direction of their walks, and a couple of grasshoppers leaped to safety. Chris and Bernie had already disappeared into the scenery before the grasshoppers had even regained their balance. Rustles were very good at that. So they hadn't really been in any danger at that point, but they were reminded that being so small required always being aware of who and what was around them. Holly's dad had actually been squatting quite close to Bernie and Chris, a lot closer than they would normally feel safe with when one of the giants was around, but they had been so lost in their thoughts they had just ignored him. From their new positions, they both listened as he scraped the saw along the lines, then started to move it side to side along a dark and flat line at the top of the marks. Eventually, the saw disappeared through the fence panel, and although it got a bit stuck and wiggly on the way out, it was removed and the dust was blown away. Bernie and Chris simply could not work out what the giant was doing. They could see a little bit of light shining through the cut in the fence, but even Chris couldn't guess what purpose it could serve. Things began to get loud again soon after, though, and a bit clearer too, as Holly's dad repeated the scraping movement on the two vertical lines. He then bent himself into a very strange shape, with his head pointing down between his legs and the saw moving up from the ground. After a few minutes of this, he stopped, and then he pushed against where the lines had been, and the hole in the fence panel appeared. And that was when a lot of things changed. Two gardens became one garden. Two areas became one area. Two territories became one territory. Two Russells in one garden and one Russell in another garden were now breathing the same air and sharing some of the same light. An escape route had been created. An entrance to another land had been created. Everything was different. Possibilities and solutions had just been delivered, and yet nobody knew. Chris and Bernie were still listening as the giant reached through the hole, pulled a piece of the fence panel back through it, stood up, and then jogged back to the top of the garden and back inside the house. Chris, my friend, what has just happened there? Said Bernie. Chris knew another strange event was happening, but nothing was stranger than the fact Chris simply didn't have an answer. Nearby, Ash was waking suddenly from a nap and realising that things in this new land were still just a bit odd. Right, okay, what has just happened here? I'm having a nap and then spiders appear. They're covered in dust and they've run to my shell. There's noise, fuss and rustling, a warm, woody smell. They've run here from something, so that can't be good. But why are they dusty and smelling of wood? I can't hear a noise, so I think I'll get out. I'll have a quick look and I'll wander about. Ash wriggled free of the clamshell, took a look around and decided that nothing had actually changed that much at all, really. This land and the area around was all new anyway, so it wasn't a surprise that the hole was just there in the panel. And the route home wasn't spotted. Anyway, it was a few steps away from where Ash was, and when you are the size of a Russell, you generally don't see things until they're getting quite close. In fact, both ends of the garden have now gone fairly quiet. Holly and Jake both sets of parents were indoors. The parents were occupied with weekend things that adults do, making shopping lists and deciding when to go to the garden centre to buy chipped bark now that it was on special offer. Holly had dozed off in her room and Jake was researching small animals that could be found in gardens, but still not trusting his eyes from the night before. He had entered the names of various mice and voles into his tablet, but wasn't seeing anything as small or furry as what he thought he might have seen the night before. He was getting nowhere, but was determined to prove himself right and Holly wrong, but in a friendly way. He decided to take a different approach and simply typed "very small mammals in a garden" into his search engine. After a couple of seconds, several results loaded, and he saw an image that made him sit bolt upright and smile. Yes, He half whispered and half shouted as his fist punched the air. "Wait until Holly sees this!" The opportunity to talk to Holly came soon after, as Jake's parents decided they were going to do the weekly shopping and meet friends for a cup of tea afterwards. They didn't think Jake would be too keen to join them, but he wasn't old enough to be left alone, so when Holly's dad popped round to let them know the hole had been cut, they were all happy when Jake was offered the chance to hang out at Holly's house for the afternoon. Of course, Jake tried not to look too excited, even though his sense of relief at what he had found on the internet was huge. He walked back with Holly's dad casually, holding his rucksack, which contained the notebook from the campout, but now also contained his tablet, ready to spring into action. Bernie and Chris were not in the mood to spring into any kind of action. In fact, after yet another very strange episode in their part of the garden, which even Chris couldn't explain, they had both decided that another nap was the best idea. Too much was happening in the daytime at the moment, and they were not usually that busy in the daylight anyway, so the decision to hide in a shell and sleep was an easy one to make. They would wake later when their tummies rumbled — it made a loud noise when curled up in a snail shell — and would nibble some food and then nap again, deciding that they wouldn't come out until the day was getting darker and the nighttime smells were arriving. As soon as Jake arrived, Holly could see straight away that his mood had got a lot better. He was smiling and poking his head round the door to her room. In fact, he was pulling an overly smiley, toothy grin face. "Holly," he half called and half laughed, "I think we can both relax, for I have found the answer." Oh, there's that pause again. You know what that pause means, don't you? It means that this little chapter's finished. If you come back tomorrow, the next chapter will be waiting. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.